everyone, Rafael here, bringing another unusual OutSystems use case. Today I want to talk about a solution I have been working on for automated testing in OutSystems. This solution uses AI agents together with Playwright to build, execute, and recover test cases inside a secure OutSystems environment. I hope it can bring different perspectives on how to use OutSystems with agents, and I will start by showing the application and how the demo works from the user perspective. Then I will also talk about how we can execute Playwright tests inside OutSystems automatically without needing to run the tests locally on your machine. I will also show how we can use interoperability between O11 and ODC, where ODC provides the application and agent experience, while O11 can execute Playwright actions locally on the server. And after that, I will also talk about the AI side of the solution. The architecture is a little bit complex because it's not only one component. We have an ODC application, an O11 environment, Playwright tools, MCP, REST APIs, model integration, and also the option to use local infrastructure with an agent orchestrator and local models. So without further ado, let's jump into the action. Alright, so before jumping into the application, let me quickly show the high-level architecture so we have the full picture in mind. At a high level, the solution has three main areas. First one in the middle is the ODC environment. This is where the Playwright Console and the Playwright Agent live, and this is the main interface I will use in this demo. On the left, we have the O11 environment. This is where the Playwright tools can execute tests locally on the server using a local extension and an async runner. Okay, we have the communication using the new interoperability tools from ODC to O11. And finally, on the right, we have the model integration layer. This can connect to either external LLMs such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, or it can also run in a local infrastructure. It will depend on your security requirements. Okay. In my case, I am using an agent orchestrator done in C# with an LLM that is running with Olama. This is creating an agentic loop where I can add a little bit more determinism to my solution. We will talk about why I made it this way later, but for now, let's just keep in mind that this local infrastructure in my case has access to things like a Playwright, CLI, Sure APIs, any other customizable tools, and it is what is powering my agentic loop for better performance. Okay? There is a lot happening in this architecture and we will come back to it later, but for now I want to focus on the middle part here, the ODC environment, where I have the Playwright Agent Console, especially because this is where the user experience starts. Now let's go into the actual application. So here we are on the landing page of the Playwright console. This page shows the list of test cases that we already have in the system. Each card is a test case. We can see the title, the version, the last execution date, and if it was a success or not. I will go ahead and start a new test case. This will take us to the initial agent screen, where the experience is intentionally similar to an AI chat interface, where instead of manually creating every Playwright comment, I can simply describe what I want to test. The agent will use then that information to plan the test case, interact with the browser, generate the steps we need, and execute it. We also have some extra options to add more information, such as analyze your ticket, where the agent will use the Jira integration to get information from the ticket to create the steps to test that use case. And we also have a microphone option here. So I will start with something very, very simple. like open OutSystems.com. I will press enter. The agent will now start to work in my test case. This process can take some time, so it's important to make it asynchronous. In this case, it was very fast. So let's continue from here. Okay, so here the agent already defines the steps I will need to execute what I asked. So he gave me a brief description of what he did, opened OutSystems and captured the initial snapshot. If I look to the left, I can see the test steps. So here it launched the Playwright and simply navigated to the OutSystems page. I can double check it here by going to the details to see the parameters he's passing to this command. Alright, so it asks me if I want to start the test execution as well. Let's try to do that just to see how it goes. I will choose yes. Now, it is not interacting with the model anymore. Instead, it is interacting with the O11 environment through the interoperability we have to run these commands into the server, into the O11 server. So we will see here what is happening. Here we have a device preview, actually a browser preview to see what happens. Perfect. So it launched the application and then navigated to our systems page. And we can see here that it really worked. Okay, I also noticed we have here a pop-up to accept the cookies that we need to accept in order to keep using the OutSystems website. And I want to add this acceptance as part of my test case. In order to do that, I could do it in different ways. I could, for example, come here to my agent and say accept cookies. This will trigger the same process we have seen before, where the agent go to the model and get the steps needed to execute these new instructions. However, I think it is also a good opportunity to show a different feature we have here on the console, which is adding a manual step on demand. So for example, let's say I want to click that specific accept cookies button. I could come here in the command list, add a command that would allow me to click a specific element, such as the locator click. I could add the steps needed to define the locator manually as well. But since we already executed a test and we already have an HTML from this last execution, let's try to use it to select the specific buttons ourselves. So you can see here that we have the HTML. If I come here and click the button I want to click, what will happen is that I will have some locators recommended to me. You can see we have two recommendations, two candidates. Both of them are unique, which is very important. They have different scores, meaning a higher score is more reliable. We have more confidence that it will work. So I will use this one. It's also important to note that we are not using IDs. We are using different attributes from the elements, like the names or the roles, classes, anything that is not the ID. Because in OutSystems, the IDs are generated by the platform and can change without any warning, which could also break our test. So I will go ahead and use this first one, which is unique and has a high score. Once I click use, you can see that all the fields were filled for me automatically. It means that now this has every information that the agent will need to click that specific element. I will go ahead and save here. It will then add this specific command to our list of test steps. You can see here that we have now the locator click added in my list, and I will also add an extra step to wait for any other navigation we might have running in the background. So I will go here and add another command to wait for load state. And the state I want to wait for is network idle, which means nothing is still running. I will go ahead and save this command as well. So now we have 3 commands, the one we had before and 2 new commands, and I will go ahead and run this test case to see what happens. So here we are going again to O11 to our interoperability tools. It already launched the Playwright session. We can see here on the live preview, it navigated with the pop-up is still visible. It will now try to click that specific button. There we go. It clicked the pop-up and the pop-up disappeared, and then it is waiting for anything that is still happening. Finally, it could validate that anything else is happening, and it completed the test successfully. You can see now that we have the OutSystems page without the pop-up anymore. We could keep iterating our tests here, adding more information or asking more steps for our agent. But let's stop here and talk about some other features we have in the Agent Console. So if we go here to the left side menu of our test case, we can see some important information. We can see the test steps that we already talked about. If we click on the details, you will be able to see the parameters it receives. You will also be able to see the last screenshot, what were the response details. If there is any error here, we will have the errors as well. We can also see that we have a browser dropdown where we can choose which browser we want to run this test case against. Okay, so we could also test the same test case in Firefox, Safari, or the Edge browser. Here we can see the different executions that we had for this test. We can also validate all the versions that were generated by the system for this specific test. So for example, now that we have added 2 more steps or commands, I can come here and tag a new version. So I can always keep iterating and go back to this version in case something goes wrong. It's important to say that every time we ask the agent to do something, it already generates automatically a new version. This way, if it hallucinates or do something you didn't want it to do, you can always go back to the previous version without any issues. We can see here that we also have some editable information. Here, for example, I could add a name for my test case, like open OutSystems and go. Oh, there we go. Sorry, open OutSystems site only. I could even start it from a different test case if I want to have reusability as part of my test suite. Okay. Another attribute that I want to highlight that I think it's very important is this one right here, max auto retries. This is a specific feature I added to give the agent the ability to self-heal in case something goes wrong. So imagine in OutSystems that we did a specific change for some reason that changed the location of my elements that I was clicking, but it didn't really change anything else on the structure. So my test should still be valid. However, since I changed the position of an element, it might be that my locator doesn't work anymore, right? The mapping that I had before to find that element is not valid anymore because of the change. So what this does is that it will try to self-heal by going back to the model with the last HTML. It will try to see if it is still has the same element in a different position, or if there is anything that could make sense to still use to keep the test uh, going to a success stage, and it will try a max of 3 times to do this change. Now, this is something that will still ask for approval to change. Sometimes it can send an email letting the user know that the test was changed, or if you are doing it through the chat interface, it will also ask you if you want to proceed. All right, so now that we have seen the actual application, let's jump into the fun part, the technical details. Let's start with Odyssey and the agents we have there. There are a couple of points I would like to highlight. The first one being how to run agents in your local infrastructure. If you are interested in doing it, please have a look at this article I wrote in Medium. It explains in a very detailed way how you can achieve that. But just to make sure everyone is aware, on the Odyssey side, it is very transparent. It behaves just like any other model. Okay? The second thing that I wanted to highlight is that the interactions with the browser and the Odyssey server needs to be asynchronous, especially because we have very low timeouts in Odyssey. So you will notice that I am using events here. There are a couple of um, Forge components to show examples on how to do just that. So if you have interest in knowing how to achieve that, please have a look at these two Forge components, a sync summarizer app and agent. It will explain how you can achieve a synchronous pattern to send the interactions and wait for the model to run without timing out. Finally, it's also important to say that I have two different applications in Odyssey. One is the agent, where I have all the integrations to the model, O11, MCPs, data models, and logic. And the other application is the console, where I have the UI that we just saw. So all the screens are here, and this consumes my agent. Playwright. Now, moving to O11, let's talk about what we have here. On O11, we have the Playwright application with several modules. The first one I would like to talk about is the Playwright extension. So this extension is actually a C# extension that launches the Playwright session in the OutSystems server, meaning your test case is never going to be executed outside your control. So it will always be inside OutSystems itself. We also have the Playwright server MCP, which is the one we use on Odyssey as well. Here, the way we do the integration is by exposing some specific methods in the format the MCP standard expects. So this is something that also allows us to connect to Odyssey and define tools for our models. So if you go to Odyssey under the models, you will see that I have all the tools that I have from my MCP in O11. I will explain what I use it for later, but for now, I just wanted to highlight that exposing a MCP server from O11 it's also possible. I also have here the APIs as I mentioned that I use from Odyssey to run my commands, right? You can see I have here on my integration that the API consumer is ODC, which means that it will not count for AOs, which is very useful, especially when you have this type of use case. And the main reason why I chose to do this in O11 is because I wanted to have persistency across sessions. So I wanted to be able to keep the Playwright session enabled in O11 even if I was in a different transaction. So to give an example, if I go to this O11 application I created just to help me test the Playwright extension, you will notice that I can create a session for Playwright in the server and keep iterating it even in a different transaction, right? So if I go here, for example, and say I want to navigate to a page even after I initialized the session, I will be able to. So I have persistence across transactions. This is not possible to do in ODC because the extensions, the custom code we have in ODC are handled using a Lambda function. So they are serverless. We don't have server context. And this was very important to me. Something else I also wanted to talk about is how I integrate with ODC to the APIs. So I have an API that I expose from 11 to ODC, which I allow ODC to send the commands I want to run in my Playwright session. However, I couldn't wait too long for this specific request because we have low timeouts on ODC. So to work around that, I also used a for and forget pattern by using a specific Forge component that is called async you later. So this is also available in Forge. It will allow you to run a service action by specifying its name and running it in the background without needing to wait for a synchronous response. And finally, I also want to talk a little bit about the agentic loop I created with the C# agent orchestrator and why I did it this way. The main reason was because I wanted to have a better control over the response of my model before sending it back to ODC. By implementing this agent orchestrator, I was able to implement custom validations. I was able to have access to the Playwright CLI that runs locally in my machine, and also access to Jira APIs for my own Jira integrations. So what I did as part of this orchestrator is basically a wrapper that works between the model and the Playwright agent. So the model would expose the shared completions endpoints in the OpenAI format. My agent also exposed the same endpoints to my Playwright agent. My orchestrator exposed these endpoints to my Playwright agent. However, I keep going back and forth between orchestrator and Olama before sending the information back to Playwright to ensure specific criteria is met, such as I make sure the response that will return to Playwright is in a specific format that my agent will expect, or if all the tools that my model is creating, all the steps it is giving back to OutSystems match what we have in the MCP, in the O11 MCP tools. So this is done by using a high customizable C# application. Here I can define, for example, what are the validators I want to include, what are the tools I want to give access to the orchestrator. This is something I am planning to migrate later for the Cloud SDK. So not having a C# orchestrator anymore, maybe a Python or even C Sharp. We could use C Sharp as well, but using the Cloud SDK with accesses to different skills, hooks, which would give us more structure for this specific use case as well. All right, this is all I wanted to show. I really hope this helps bringing different perspectives and showing a little bit of what is possible with OutSystems. I would love to answer any questions. Feel free to reach me out through the community. If you are interested in using this in your production environment, just let me know. I am more than happy to also help with that. Thank you, and until the next time.